No, this room is a little bit quiet. Good morning, everyone. How's everybody doing? Great, fantastic, fantastic. I hope you're as excited for this conversation as we are. I think over the past 2 days, there have been pockets of cybersecurity. So now we're dedicating some good time in really delving into how the financial institutions can actually safeguard against these evolving cybersecurity risks. So I'm actually joined here on stage by a cyber expert, a tech expert extraordinaire, Ms. Itumeleng, who is the Divisional Executive of Group Technology at Nedbank. Itu, welcome, and I'm excited to have this conversation with you.
Thank you, Kamo. Thank you for that warm welcome. I'm honored to have the opportunity to have this conversation with you. Really a topic that I'm very passionate about, so I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you. It's a conversation I'm also excited about because it's something that affects each and every single one of us, right, on a daily basis in one way or another. So let's get straight into it, right? There have been quite a number of news reports about breaches, security breaches. So I just want to get into conversation with you about how do we fortify systems around cybersecurity, and particularly for banks. What are the most significant cybersecurity challenges that banks are actually facing now?
That is actually a very interesting question that you're asking, because there are a lot of ways in which you can look at this. I think if we just take a step back and look at how banks are progressing their digital transformation strategies at this point, a lot of us are going digital first, where we are using digital as a differentiator and as a strategy that will position us in the market. And to do that, we need to then bring in next generation technologies into how we interface and integrate with our customers or collaborate with our customers. And with that comes a lot of risks, right? As much as we're saying there's value in bringing in these new technologies, how do you then ensure that you're doing it in a secure way, you're doing it in a responsible way, you're not exposing your customers to any additional risks? I think that is the core of what we need to be thinking about. So what it really means is that as you're putting together your digital strategy for your bank and how you want to position yourself, security needs to be at the center of how you're going to do it. It shouldn't be an afterthought. It shouldn't be something that you do once you're ready to deploy. But at the point when you have the concept of employing a new solution into your environment, think about how you then protect your customers and your employees, for that matter. So if you going back to your question around what are some of the risks and how do you protect against those risks? I think phishing is still a big factor that we're seeing in financial services, where a lot of phishing campaigns are becoming more and more sophisticated, and threat actors are finding ways in which they can get information from our customers in different ways. I think that is one big factor. And financial services, as we know, hold a lot of confidential information about their customers. So we'll continue to be a target from threat actors. So there's always an opportunity for us to look for ways to protect ourselves in that sense.
Thanks. There's so many powerful words that you said there. You said mitigating the risk. You said not making security an afterthought. So in that sense, how do you then strike a balance, right, between not making it an afterthought and yet still being forward thinking? How do you strike that balance?
That is always a challenging component to look at, because security should not be something that creates friction in the customer experience. It should still be something that secures the customer, but our customers still want to have seamless access to their devices or to their banking apps or internet banking if they use internet banking, without having to go through hoops and loops to get to what they need to get to. So I think the key factors you need to think about is having a risk-based approach to your security. So it should be based on the probability of a risk happening and the cost that would have to the business, and then employing the right solution to protect. So I would say it's a fit-for-purpose, risk-based approach that you need to take when you implement your solutions. But also educating your customers on why you're doing certain things is very important. It shouldn't feel like you're doing it to them, but you're doing it with them. Right. Educate them, make them understand, so that when you implement those solutions, they fully understand why you are then adding additional layers of protection for their data or whatever solutions you've deployed to them.
Fantastic. And I'm so glad that you actually brought in the customer, right? Because at the end of the day, I think it was mentioned in one of the previous panels to say that with the customers volunteering their information and that currency of trust between the customer and between the bank itself. But what we're also seeing is that cyber threats are evolving, right? On a day-to-day basis, the hackers are getting more and more creative. So with that in mind, what emerging technologies perhaps do you see as potential game changers in the cybersecurity conversation?
There are quite a few. There are quite a few, definitely, that we can talk about. But I think your point around threat actors being more and more sophisticated and coming up with new ways is a valid point, and that's definitely what we see. And only using human resources to try and solve this problem, we've quickly realized that this is not going to solve it. Right. We definitely have to leverage technology to be able to do that. And I think with AI, generative AI, has given us a big leverage because it is able to analyze huge sets of data to then detect if there are any anomalies in your data, or employing behavioral analytics so that you better understand and know your customers, so that if there is anything unusual that happens from your customer's behavior point of view, you're then able to respond quickly. So there are a few technologies that we can deploy. I also think technologies like blockchain, which will give you an immutable ledger that cannot be augmented or updated by a threat actor, it really gives us an advantage in a way in which we can respond and position ourselves as a bank that is able to protect our customers. Because really, you talk about trust, our customers see trust as a given. Right? It is our license to operate. Right. They expect it as a minimum when they engage with us. So we have to be thinking about these next generation technology to augment the people that are actually having to do this on a day-to-day basis.
Oh, that's so good. And just again to ride on what you just said, again with the customer in mind. So we know that as everybody is moving towards digital banking, there are now there's phishing, there's vishing, there's smishing, right? All the shings, right? And how do we adopt best practices, and how can banks mitigate these risks to further protect the customer? And also, in answering, if you just could highlight what some of the common risks are that customers are facing, what are some of the more common risks that the banking sector is facing in this regard, as you mentioned, the risks element?
Correct. Very pertinent question, actually, because if you think about the vishing, I'm sure we've all received these SMSs that look weird and they tell you you've won money in a competition and you must click on a link, or, you know, you need to phone Mr. Whoever who's left some inheritance for you. I don't know if people still fall for that. But actually, these are getting more and more sophisticated where they actually starting to know you as a customer. Right. The threat actors actually see you as their customer and they know you. And they will use information that is more relevant, that will make you more responsive. So they're no longer using these hypothetical SMSs. They will use something very specific that will make sense to you and will make you want to respond. Very important that we then educate our customers on how to then handle that.
Yes.
And know who to call, know how to handle it, and don't act on emotion, I guess, because they're always working on your emotion and how you're going to respond. Then contact your bank and get the right information around how you should handle a specific issue if you're not sure. I think that is one way from a customer's perspective. But internally, we should not forget insider threats. We've got people in our organizations that have got access to highly confidential information. Right. That you would not just give to anyone. So very important that you've got the right privilege access management solutions in your organization to understand who's got access to what information at what point, what do they use it for, and they should only have access at the point when they need it.
Right.
In that way, you have control over who's accessing your critical information within your organization. I think that is very important. So those are just some of the things from an external perspective and internally that we need to continue to ensure that we manage. But I also think internally we shouldn't see security as a technology thing, or the cybersecurity team sitting on the side will resolve it and ensure it is a collaborative effort across all of the
Across
business
all units,
to ensure that we are protecting that license to operate as a banking institution. We're not impacting our reputation in the market, and we're all in it together. So there should be opportunities for the business to innovate around how we do it. And this innovation can come from anywhere. It could be from a frontline staff member who's sitting in a branch and they have an idea around how we can protect the customer. We should have processes that are able to then harness that innovation and bring it into a central point so that we're working on it all together. So it's not a risk function, it's not a fraud function, but it's all of us in an organization ensuring that we're able to protect ourselves.
That's so good. And I think you're touching on something that's so important, and that's the avoidance of working in silos, right? And looking at security as an isolated matter. Whereas, as you so rightfully said, Itu, that it's something that touches across the whole business. And I think we'd all be remiss to look at it in isolation. And I think you touched on something as well about educating the customer. And I know we just had a little giggle here talking about all the shings, but just for the purpose and the benefit of everyone in the room so that it's not seen as an insider joke, the vishing is where they use voice, right? Maybe you might get a call and then there's some automated voice instructing you to do certain things. And the first question to yourself is probably like, how did you get my number? Right? So those are some of the things we also need to be aware of. And the smishing is when they will use texts and say, click on this link to access that inheritance that was left by the third cousin of the corner house, for example, right? So let's just move on. With our discussion. Now let's talk about unlocking the power of digital banking through security and technology. Security technology not only protects the financial institutions, but it can also unlock new opportunities as well in digital banking, right? And as you've so rightfully said and has been said by a number of colleagues here in the room, that investing in robust security is important. So how can these advanced security technologies, for example, like biometric authentication, earlier on you spoke about blockchain, how can these technologies actually enhance the customer experience? Because at the end of the day, the customer is the end user, right? So how can these technologies enhance that customer experience?
Good question that you're asking, because it's really at the center of what we do. Everything we do, even within technology, we are thinking about the impact on the customer and the value that this is going to add to what the customer receives at the end of the day once you deploy your solution into production. So if we talk about, say, let's take biometrics, where you use maybe facial recognition or you use your voice to recognize or to identify who you are, it really adds that additional layer of security over and above just having a password that you then you punch into your device, or if you're on internet banking on your profile. But you add that additional, meaning it gives you a multi-layer protection when you have to use these things. So, but with biometrics, it really gives the convenience of not having to just remember what your password is or having to refresh your password, but it is something about you that you cannot change that is uniquely you. So again, when you deploy something like that, it's value to the customer.
Right.
It gives convenience, it's seamless. You just show your face, we know who you are, and we give you access to what you need to be given access to. So those are just some of the things that we think about. How do we still protect you, but in a convenient and a seamless way? Considering that your banker is not always going to be there with you. I mean, gone are the days where banks will be 9 to 4, and you know you can only do your banking during those hours. Now we want to bank at any time, anyway, any device, you know.
Right.
So it's very important that at that point where you are, we empower you to be able to protect yourself. Right. So those are just some of the technologies that we're thinking about to ensure that we fully protect you at all levels.
You know, you touched on something so important there, where you said that even now for us, ourselves as consumers, where we want to bank on the go, right? Where it's not necessarily mandatory for you to walk into a branch, you can bank anywhere. And obviously with that, it heightens the risk. So in what ways do you think banks can actually use security as a competitive advantage in the digital banking space?
I think it goes back to the conversation we had earlier where I said security is a given from a customer perspective. I expect you, as a minimum, that if I give you all of the data that I'm giving you, you are going to protect it. It is your license to operate. It is something that goes with your brand. Your reputation in the market is based on how well do you protect the data that is given to you by your customers. So very important that you take it very seriously. I mean, I think if we look at fraud, I was just reading an article the other day where it says that fraud numbers are continuously increasing, especially in financial services, where about 5% of your revenue is lost just due to fraud. So it is something that we need to take very seriously because globally we're looking at about 4 trillion a year that just gets lost because maybe someone hasn't done something they needed to do, or threat actors are seriously taking it as a job that gives them good revenue. Right. So we're going uphill when it comes to security, and it's very critical and imperative that we ensure that we've got the right technologies. We invest in the latest and next generation items that will ensure that we're protecting our customers. So it's a combination of things that we need to put in place to ensure that we're able to operate and remain competitive as a bank in the market.
You touched on something so important there. Those losses, 4 trillion in any currency is a lot. That's a big loss. So then my question then becomes, there are a lot of smaller banks, right, that are emerging. Some MNOs are moving into financial services as well. There's the advent of mobile money, for example. So what do you think smaller financial institutions can actually learn from bigger financial institutions such as yourselves? And also, what can those, like cooperative banks, for example, just the smaller financial institutions, what is it that they can learn from big financial institutions?
I really think collaboration across all organizations, actually not just limited to financial services. If you look at our telcos, if you look at our technology companies, when it comes to the cybersecurity risk, collaboration becomes key. Right. There needs to be an opportunity or a space for these companies to then come together and learn from each other to ensure that we're dealing with this issue at an industry level, at a country level, and not just as individual businesses. I know it happens for the bigger banks, but it would make sense to then start bringing in those small players so that they're able to understand what are the minimum things that you can do without really having to break the bank from a technology perspective, just to ensure that you're able to operate in a secure way.
Wonderful, wonderful. Such important things. I hope if there is a smaller financial institution in the room, I hope you took that note down. Thanks for sharing that, Itu. So now let's look ahead, right? If we could have superpowers and look a little bit into the future. We know for a fact that cyber risks are evolving on a day-to-day basis, and the security landscape seems to be changing as well on a daily basis. So what do you think are some cyber threats that banks should be preparing for in the next 5 to 10 years? I did say let's
no, that's definitely
superpowers.
If I could read that crystal ball and come up with an answer, but I guess you can see the trends, right? Yeah. Looking at where we are just broadly in technology, it gives an indication of where we're going to be. But I also think the threats that we have today are not going to necessarily change much. Mm-hmm. If I think about ransomware, that is still lucrative for bad actors. They're going to continue to try and exploit big organizations to make money out of the data that they have within the organization. So that's something that we need to continuously look at and continuously innovate around how do we respond to ransomware. But with the advent of AI, that also gives threat actors a big lever in how they can quickly scale whatever they want to deploy into your organization. So we really need to, as much as we're looking at deploying AI to assist us against the threats, they're also using AI to then attack us and move faster and make sure that they're able to scale quicker. Right. So that's something that we need to think about. But I also think supply chain attacks, where instead of going directly into your organization, they go via a third party that is plugged into your environment would be one way in which we really need to be thinking about how we manage supply chain attacks coming into our environments is a critical point.
Sure.
I would also think that third-party risks become critical because as we're building these next generation channels and interfaces and tools that we deploy into our clients, a lot of times we're partnering with third parties to build an ecosystem of solutions that we can then position as a service offering to our customers. We then need to think about security beyond just what we are responsible for as a bank, but looking at our third parties and everyone that's plugged into the ecosystem. How do we ensure that together we're able to then protect the customer?
That's so great. And I'm glad you mentioned the word ecosystem there. So just latching on that word, that ecosystem word, what can financial institutions do to actually foster that culture of continuous learning? Be it from the customer, be it from, as you mentioned as well, third parties as well. What can be done to actually foster a culture of learning and adaptation in order to stay ahead of these evolving threats?
I would think that if we take maybe firstly an internal view within a bank or in any organization for that matter, if you want to ensure that you have a culture of learning, you have processes that allow people to give feedback, right? A culture of being able to give feedback when you have a question, when there's something that you want clarity on. What is that process and who do I go to if I need to have a conversation around security or fraud within an organization? And having those clearly communicated in the organization makes a huge difference because then your employees know exactly what they will need to do if they pick up something that they're doing in their day-to-day execution of the business and operations. That's one way in which you think about it. But also outside in, your customers need to know if I have an issue, if there's something that I need to flag with my bank, who do I go to? What do I do?
Where do I start?
It's as simple as that. Otherwise, if you don't have a clearly defined process, you're not able to capture all of these things to then learn as an organization. I think that's one way to think about it. And as an industry, if we don't share our learnings, if we don't share our strategies around some of these things, we're then not able to learn together and move forward, right? So if there's something that I pick up within my organization, I should be able to go into a bigger forum where I would be able to share what we've seen and how we've responded, will then allows us to learn much quicker instead of each organization having to figure it out on their own. Those are just some of the things that we can think about.
Wonderful. And I'm glad you mentioned the industry as a whole, right? And within the industry, something that cannot be overlooked, cannot be ignored are the regulatory bodies, right? So what role do you think the regulatory bodies can play in actually shaping the future of cybersecurity for the banking sector at large?
Regulators play such a critical role in ensuring that we have the right standards and we have a common understanding of what best practice would look like when it comes to information security. And also just playing a more of a, I'd say, a referee role, standing on the side and being able to give feedback on how you're doing. So we actually need to work closely with regulators. I know it's not always the case in banking when you have to deal with the regulator, but there's value in having that relationship because they could show you blind spots that you're not aware of based on their understanding of a bigger context of where we should be going and how we should be protecting financial services in a country. So there's value in having regulators then setting those standards, ensuring that as threat actors evolve, we also have regulations that are able to protect us and protect the customer at the end of the day.
Wonderful. Thanks, Itu. I think at this point of our conversation, I think it would be right just to open it up to the audience. And if anybody maybe has a pertinent question or there's a burning issue that is cyber related that you'd maybe just want to highlight very quickly, do indulge. See one here. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to ask, what is your take on the rise of the deep fakes? I mean, I'm starting to think about our elderly and what the deep fakes cyber threat is doing right now in the industry. How do we protect them to make sure that they don't fall prey to such? Thanks.
You raise a very good point. Sorry, I didn't get your name.
Oh, my name is Sam from FNB Lesotho.
Thanks, Sam. Sam, you raise a very important point when you talk about, I guess, the more vulnerable people in our society. Right. Sometimes when we deploy these solutions, we're not thinking about people that will not be able to adopt some of these technology because they grew up in a different generation. They might not be as exposed as a Gen Z or Gen Alpha, they call themselves nowadays, or anybody else that is a digital native. So it's very important from a customer experience that you think about those personas as you're building your solutions. Maybe when you deploy into someone like that, you need to have an option for them not to use this top tech when they engage with your bank. Stick to your USSD, they send a text to someone, a text comes back. Keep it simple, because your customer expects a simple interface. But someone who is more younger, who's more in touch with technology, would want to see better technologies that are AI-enabled, that have intelligence built across the board. So it's important to have an option for people that will not be able to use next-generation technology. But also taking the opportunity to educate on these deepfakes or any other threat. Educate them on these things and say, this is how you would see if something doesn't make sense or is not valid. And who do you then reach out to get the support that you need? I think would be very important. Give them an option to use something different, but continue to educate.
And I think if I could just chime in there, that was such an important question because it brings in something that you also touched on in terms of the AI, because the deep fakes are being used for that purpose. And again, it speaks to what you were speaking about, protecting identities, right? Because with deep fakes, people mimic voices, they mimic faces, and it goes back to what you were touching on about those different emerging technologies that can be employed to protect the customer. We see there's a question right at the back there. You're more than welcome to pose your question.
Thank you. How then do you strike a balance between, in terms of customer information? Because if I imagine, think about a setting where you have got rural customers and you want to sort of let them know through your marketing departments that you don't need to go to this platform. Like you said, you want to give people these options. How as a bank or as banks can we then cleverly or what other word can I use? Subtly tell our customers in a way that will not scare them. Because I think as a customer in maybe a rural setting, because whenever we talk about cybersecurity, whenever we talk about these advancements, we normally want to deal with, we normally look at these more advanced customers. But I like that you touched on go back to USSD. But how do you strike a balance in terms of informing customers in a way that will not maybe scare them to think, am I safe with this bank? How do you craft that message in a way that the customers will then really understand? I hope I'm getting through.
You
My name is Luke from AFC Zimbabwe.
You said Luke from, okay.
AFC in Zimbabwe.
Thanks, Luke. A very good question that you're asking. Because we need to think, we are in Africa at the end of the day, and a lot of our customers, if you look more broadly than just South Africa, would be sitting in a rural setting somewhere, but still wanting to have a good experience with their bank. When we talk about warm digital, where someone goes into a branch, because they still prefer to engage with a human when they go into a branch, but your branch must be hyper-automated, hyper-personalized with the right technology so that when they go into a branch, they still get to experience the best of technology. So really reimagining how a branch would look in future would be different, right? So this individual, what they would know is if I need to do banking, I don't pick up my phone, but I need to go into a branch. And when I go there, I need to be assisted on specific things. But they still want to feel that you know them, you understand them, you've got their data, you understand exactly what kind of relationship you would have with them. So it's a good balance of still going digital, but with a human element. But when it comes to then educating your customers as they walk into the branch, you're not going to talk to them about deep fakes and AI and hyper automation and intelligent this and that. You're going to lose them before you even get to the second sentence. It's talking about a language that they understand in a simple way. Explain to me what I need to do and why I need to do it. And how do I know if I'm at risk? And why is my bank doing this? I think if you're very clear on your why and the solutions that you're deploying, at any level, a customer will then understand. So we really need to move away from business speak and technology speak when we're doing these things and make it relevant to the individual that you're engaging with.
Thank you, Luke. Oh, there's another question. Oh, 2 questions. Fantastic.
Hello. Yes, really interesting chats. I'm Matt from FICO, but I want to get your opinion on something. So, my father-in-law, there was a fraud attack, and it wasn't Nedbank, so don't worry. It was quite a big fraud attack. My father-in-law had, and a lot of money was taken out from his kind of pension. He got a phone call as the money entered the account, and he gave his OTP. So I want to get your kind of opinion on where does the accountability lie? You know, I know he's old, he's not really, you know, tech savvy, but the fact that, you know, the fraudsters knew the money was coming in, they had his details, they called him, they caught him out. You know, just really understand where you feel who should be responsible from a banking perspective. It's an open-ended question.
Yeah,
It's quite tough.
It's a great question.
It's sad what happened to your father-in-law. Very sorry to hear. But if you think about that value chain of there's a transaction that happens in the bank, an OTP gets sent to an individual, and then they need to then punch it into a certain tool or device to then validate. There are a lot of players in that value chain. It could be with the bank. It could be with the telco that actually sends the OTP. It could be with the actual device that they're using. How is it protected to ensure that he's not then able to be hacked or people aren't able to access the OTP? So it's across different players that things could have gone wrong. So I cannot sit here and say it was the bank or he should have done something. It's a combination of things, and you need to understand the context a little bit more. But again, it goes back to the question of, I guess, the elderly and their vulnerability when it comes to using technology. We really need to continuously educate on how do you respond, especially if it's transactions with high numbers. I mean, if all of your pension is sitting in a bank account and someone is asking for an OTP, it would help to just pause and say, let me just investigate. Let me find out from my bank if this is a valid transaction before I approve. It would be one way to think about it. But continuous collaboration with telcos, I know, is something that we do continuously to ensure that we're able to catch where the issues are in that process so that OTPs don't get lost or get exposed to incorrect people. We also need to find technologies that will then help us move away from OTP if it is no longer the right thing to do when it comes to validating transactions.
Thanks. That was a great question. Matt, it was? Matt, and you know, just as you were asking your question, what popped in my mind is that everybody is fair game, and we're so sorry for what happened to your father-in-law. I think just a few days ago in the news, it was reported that a company that does background checks in the US was hacked. And that led to a leak of social security numbers and addresses. 2.7 billion client records were leaked in the US. And that just tells us that it's merciless, right? And we need to be, and as you said, and I'd want to latch on that word that you used earlier, the ecosystem, right? Within this ecosystem, we all need to be more vigilant, more stringent in the approaches that we're taking, and really staying ahead of the curve to prevent Matt's father-in-law, or as Luke mentioned, the granny in a rural area. So we see that the spectrum is wide, and within this wide spectrum, there's so many gaps that need to be filled with that. I see we've got another question. You're free to ask.
Yes, we all know that when it comes to cybersecurity, there are a lot of solutions that have been put out there, or every day there is a mitigation solution that's been sold or somebody's trying to work on it. But what is missing in the conversation is the number one vulnerability for all financial institutions that we have seen from a technology perspective are the very stakeholders that work in the institutions. They are the number one vulnerability. So if somebody wants to really become a bad actor, they will identify another bad actor from the inside of the bank. Mm-hmm. However, in sub-Saharan Africa, we found out that banks either don't have the budget or they don't have the business acumen for them to be able to really adequately train their stakeholders, because the number one defense for any cybersecurity or compliance regime is your own employees, your own stakeholders. Right. They are the one that really create that primary barrier of security for you. I guess, apart from South African banks, how can sub-Saharan African banks, who are also interlinked, be able to really address these issues with the shortage of money or the lack of the will to invest into that technology, but yet they are heavily impacted? So from a South African perspective, from where you see it, into me, how can they do it? What vehicles are basically available to them to do this? Because it impacts not only their customer base, but also their revenue, right? Because most, especially the expatriate companies operating in their domains, they will just walk away and go to the next, foreign entity bank that is basically competing in their market, and they will lose that portion of the customer base. So what can they do? How do you look at it?
Interesting question that you're asking about insider threats and the budget conversation that goes with that. Because you could easily say, I know there's a new tool in the market that I could buy to ensure that I'm managing my privilege access in the organization. But if the organization has other priorities, I would say, you want to grow your revenue, you want to do different things with that money. How do you contend for that budget if you're sitting in a cybersecurity advisory role in a business? So that's my understanding of the question. So I would really think that when you have that conversation, say, I imagine you having a conversation with the CFO of the organization, you're trying to then get that budget so that you're able to buy the solutions that you need to protect the business. The conversation should not be about the technology. It's the last thing that you want to get to. I think if your point of departure is having a common understanding of the risk that you're managing, how big is that risk, and what is the impact to the business? If you and the CFO are on the same page on that, then the next conversation around how do we then resolve this becomes easier, because he's sold and he understands where you're coming from a risk perspective. You're then able to talk about, well, our options could be, we could buy this solution, we could implement these different things to ensure that we're protecting ourselves. Failing to do that, then this is how we're going to be exposed. So it always needs to be a business conversation and a risk conversation, and less about the technology that you want to buy.
So thank you so much, Itu. So I'm sorry, I didn't get your name. John. I think, John, you touched on something important where you spoke two keywords that stuck out, that being the budget, the financial element for an organization, and then the internal threat being from the internal users. So maybe if we could hear from some of the other institutions in the room to say, obviously this is a great platform for sharing. So maybe what are some of the measures that you have taken within your own organizations to help mitigate some of those internal risks that anybody would maybe be comfortable to just share some notes, obviously without divulging too much, but just so that we can see within the room what measures are being taken at the different financial institutions, or even if it's not, even if you're not a representative of a financial institution, but at some point or the other, we all need to take internal measures within our organizations. Any takers? There we go. Thank you, John. Just 1 second, the microphone is coming. Thank you.
So that's really very cardinal, right? That some of the mitigating factors is really training, right? Mm-hmm. How do you train your employees to be able to detect phishing, right? So phishing emails come almost every day. because banks are interconnected with their suppliers, with their vendors, and with their external stakeholders. We exchange email on a day-to-day basis. So you have an email coming in that is unsuspecting. It looks like a genuine email with, say, an attachment attached to it. How do you treat it? If you're not sure of the person where the email is coming from, or if you're not able to hover over the URL address and be able to see whether it's a legitimate address, how do you handle that? So those are some of the trainings that banks really need to really teach their employees, train them to be able to identify a phishing email. Don't click on it. If you look in your Microsoft Word, at the extreme right-hand corner, there is a phishing icon there which you can click on that immediately takes that email from your inbox and send it to technology. And then technology now will investigate it. So something as simple as that, if banks can only allocate the time to train their internal stakeholders, that is defense number one. You actually create a lot of help for them and create that line of defense.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much, John, for sharing. In the interest of time, I've thoroughly enjoyed today's discussion. So, Itu, are there any closing remarks from yourself?
Thank you so much for this conversation. I'm sure we just touched briefly on some of the things, but it would be good to continue this conversation because there's really a lot that needs to happen in this space, and we can really collaborate, learn from each other, and see how we move forward as an industry.
100%.
Thanks for the chat.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone as well for your engagement. I hope you took some notes and that we will continue, as you so rightfully said, to take this pertinent discussion forward in terms of securing our institutions for everyone involved in the ecosystem. So thanks everyone for your time, and thanks for lending us your ears.